The damp air smelled faintly of metal and rain. For the third time in 10 minutes, Martin checked the alley entrance. Rusty fire escape ladders clinging to the brick walls. Nothing moved. No one was there. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A brittle laugh escaped him. "You're losing it, old man," he muttered, adjusting the straps of his backpack. The canvas bag contained everything he owned: a threadbare blanket, 2 changes of clothes, a half-empty water bottle, $73.28 in crumpled bills and coins, and a photo tucked inside a plastic sleeve. His Cassie, gap-toothed and bright. The autumn sun bled orange and bruised purple, sinking below the jagged city skyline. Night was coming. Martin needed to find a spot for the night. Somewhere new, somewhere safe. He'd spent the last 3 nights in the underpass near the river, but he wouldn't go back there. Not after what he'd seen. Martin hobbled down the sidewalk, favoring his right leg. The knee injury from his construction days had worsened over the years of sleeping on concrete and cardboard. At 58, every joint protested the approach of winter.
"Hey, Martin."
The voice came from a doorway. Delia, a shapeless mass in mismatched sweaters, sat hunched on a flattened cardboard box. A paper cup with a few coins rested in front of her.
"Shelter tonight?"
"No room," Martin grunted, called ahead, full up.
"St. Michael's always squeezes folks in,"
Delia offered. Martin shook his head. "Last time I woke up barefoot, boots gone."
"Suit yourself,"
Delia said.
"but the night has teeth."
Martin considered this. Delia had been on the streets longer than he had. 4 years he'd been adrift, a consequence of the accident, the bills, the lost job, the eviction. And here he was. Delia, however, had been out here for almost a decade. The people from the street, people like them, slowly disappeared over the years. Susan, Luke, and old Joe. "Have you—" Martin's voice dropped, hesitating. "Have you seen anything strange lately?"
"Strange how?"
Delia laughed.
"Out here, normal is the true strange."
"People without, he touched his own face, a fleeting, involuntary gesture of something missing. Delia's brittle amusement faded, her eyes suddenly sharp with something akin to fear.
"Without faces? Is that what you're whispering about?"
A genuine chill, colder than the approaching night, snaked down Martin's spine. "So, you have seen them?" It wasn't a question.
"I don't see nothing."
Delia snapped, the denial coming too quickly, her voice cracking. Her hand trembled so hard, the coins clattered like teeth in the paper cup.
"And you haven't either. Keep your mouth shut, Martin. Not if you want to keep seeing anything at all."
She shoved the cup into a pocket and scrambled away, abandoning the cardboard she'd called a home for the night. Martin watched her go. He wasn't crazy then. Or they both were. 2 broken minds sharing the same delusion. His chest grew tight. He continued walking as dusk settled over the city. The streetlights flickered on, casting pools of harsh white light on the grimy sidewalk. The spaces between those pools seemed darker than they should be. Martin kept to the lit sidewalks. At the corner of 8th and Walnut, he stopped at a convenience store. The garish fluorescent lights buzzed with a relentless hum. The cashier watched him with narrow eyes as he bought a cup of coffee with coins counted out carefully on the counter. Just enough.
Anything else?
The cashier asked after sliding the coffee across to him. No, just this, Martin said, clutching the warm cup.
Then you gotta move on.
The cashier said flatly.
Store policy.
Martin nodded. He was used to this. He took his coffee and went back outside, sipping the hot liquid as he walked. It wasn't very good, but it was warm.
The night had grown colder. Martin pulled his jacket tighter around himself. He passed a group of young people laughing outside a bar, a couple holding hands as they walked to their car, a woman walking a small dog. Normal people with normal lives. They lived a world away, moving through him as if he weren't there, a ghost in their peripheral vision. Martin had become invisible long before he started seeing the faceless ones. He found himself near the park. Not ideal. The periodic police sweeps were a constant threat. But he knew a spot behind some bushes where he might burrow unnoticed until dawn. As he entered, the park stretched out before him, mostly empty at this hour. A few late-night joggers pounded along the illuminated paths, their breathing rhythmic and oblivious. A lone figure walked a dog. Martin kept to the shadows, moving toward the cluster of rhododendron bushes on the east side. Then he saw it. A figure standing perfectly still beneath an oak tree. Martin's breath hitched, a dry, painful rasp. He couldn't hear the joggers anymore, or the city traffic. Only a heavy, deafening silence pressed against his eardrums. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, the blank, non-face turned in his direction. It was looking at him, he knew it, with something that wasn't eyes. The coffee cup slid from his numb fingers, the splash, a sudden sound against the suffocating silence pressing against his eardrums. Warm coffee seeped into his worn shoes, turning cold quickly, the chill seeping deeper into his bones. But he barely noticed. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, the blank, non-face turned in his direction. He backed away slowly, then turned and walked as quickly as his bad leg would allow. He didn't run. Running attracted attention, and attention was dangerous on the streets. But he moved with purpose, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he reached the park exit, he risked a glance back. The figure was gone. But now there were two of them, standing like silent gatekeepers on either side of the path leading out of the park. Identical gray coats. Identical, horrifying voids where faces should be. Martin turned and limped in the other direction, toward the west exit. His bad knee screamed in protest, but fear pushed him forward. He stumbled onto the relative safety of the street and kept moving, his gaze fixed straight ahead, not looking back even once. He walked for nearly an hour, taking random turns, doubling back, crossing streets suddenly. The techniques he'd learned to lose persistent police officers or aggressive drunks. Finally, exhausted, he found himself in an industrial area. Warehouses and manufacturing plants stood silent at this hour. Martin spotted a loading dock with a recessed area underneath, partially hidden by dumpsters. It would do for the night. He crawled into the space, unrolled his blanket, and used his backpack as a pillow. The movement jostled something loose. A plastic sleeve containing a photograph slipped partway out. Cassie's face smiled up at him, gap-toothed and bright, frozen in the moment he'd taught her to ride her bike. 5 years since he'd seen her. 3 since they'd spoken. but he kept her photo protected, carried it everywhere. Someday, when he got back on his feet, he'd see her again. Explain everything. Make her understand why he disappeared from her life. The thought brought a little warmth to the cold night. Despite his exhaustion, sleep seemed impossible. Every sound, a distant car, the wind rustling through discarded papers, the settling of the buildings around him, made him flinch. Eventually, his eyes grew heavy, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep.
Morning arrived with thin gray light seeping under the loading dock. Martin woke stiff and cold, his joints protesting as he rolled up his blanket. His right knee had swollen overnight, a throbbing pulse of pain with every movement. He took a moment to massage it before crawling out from his shelter. The industrial park was coming to life. A few workers arrived early, their cars pulling into the parking lots. No one noticed Martin as he limped away from the warehouses toward the main road. He stopped at the same convenience store from the night before. A different cashier stood behind the counter, a young woman with dyed blue hair. Martin counted out coins for another cup of coffee, the clink of metal, a small, crisp sound in the quiet store. The cashier looked up when Martin placed the coins on the counter, then her gaze slid past him, searching the store.
Hello? Is someone there?
Martin cleared his throat, the sound feeling oddly loud in the stillness. Just me. Coffee, please. The cashier startled, her blue eyes widening as she finally focused on Martin.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
She trailed off, blinking rapidly.
Small coffee?
Yes, Martin said, pushing the coins toward her. The cashier made his coffee, sliding it across the counter with unusual care, as if afraid to touch his hand.
Have a nice day,
she said, but her eyes didn't quite meet his, lingering instead on the space just beside him, a foot higher than his head, or 6 inches to the left. It felt less like avoiding a homeless man and more like missing a target. Outside, Martin sipped his coffee, puzzling over the strange interaction. People often treated the homeless as if they were invisible, but this felt different somehow. The morning passed slowly. Martin collected a few cans from trash bins, storing them in a plastic bag to redeem later. The metallic rattle was a small counterpoint to the city's hum. He rested on benches when his knee became too painful, the cold seeping up through the wood. He watched people rush by, absorbed in their phones and conversations, walking past him as if he were a smudge on their reality. By midday, his stomach growled with hunger. Martin had $7 set aside for food, enough for a cheap meal. He headed toward a fast food restaurant near the public library. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of frying food. He joined the short queue. When his turn finally arrived, he shuffled forward to the counter.
Can I help the next person?
The cashier called, her gaze sweeping past Martin to the man standing directly behind him. Excuse me, Martin said, his voice a little rough from disuse. I'm next. The cashier jumped, her blue eyes snapping at Martin as if he had materialized from thin air.
Oh, I didn't see. I mean, what can I get you, sir?
A flush crept up her neck.
It wasn't the usual look of annoyance or pity. It was genuine shock. Martin felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. She really hadn't seen him. Martin ordered the cheapest combo meal. As he waited for his cardboard tray, he became aware of fleeting glances from other patrons, their expressions a mixture of confusion and a strained attempt to focus on him, as if he were a blurry photograph slowly coming into view. The feeling of fading washed over him again.
He took his tray to a corner table where he could watch the door, an old habit from years on the street.
2 teenagers sat at a nearby table, laughing over their phones. One looked up, directly at Martin, then quickly away.
Dude, the teen whispered, nudging his friend.
Do you see that guy over there?
His friend glanced around, his brow furrowed in confusion.
What guy?
In the corner, the old guy with the backpack.
His friend squinted in Martin's direction, his eyes scanning the shadowed corner.
I don't see anyone, man. You okay?
Martin's heart stuttered. His hand tightened around the paper cup, crumpling it slightly. The kid was messing with his friend. Had to be. Just a stupid joke. The alternative? No. He wasn't going to think about that. He hunched lower over his food and finished quickly, then left.
The weather had turned dreary. A light rain fell, the kind that soaked through clothing before you realized you were wet. Martin pulled his jacket tighter and headed toward the library. At least there he could stay dry for a few hours. The library security guard, who'd made Martin empty his pockets on previous visits, didn't even glance up from his phone this time. He made his way to the periodicals section, finding an empty armchair partially hidden by shelves. As he settled in, a strange sensation washed over him, a lightness, as if he were somehow less substantial than before. He rubbed his face, feeling the familiar contours, the stubble on his cheeks, the bump on his nose from an old break, the creases around his eyes. Everything seemed normal, yet something felt off. A librarian pushing a cart of books walked by. Martin nodded politely, as he always did. The librarian's eyes passed over him without recognition, then snapped back, widening slightly. She hurried away, glancing back once with a disturbed expression. The afternoon crawled by. Martin read old newspapers, the words blurring together after a while. He dozed, woke, dozed again. Occasionally he noticed people looking in his direction with confused expressions, but no one approached him. As closing time approached, he gathered his backpack and headed for the exit. The security guard, a burly man who typically watched homeless patrons leave carefully, chatted with a colleague, completely ignoring Martin as he passed. The rain had stopped, but the evening air felt colder. He needed to find a spot for the night. The loading dock had worked well enough, but it was too far to walk with my knee acting up. He headed toward the underpass near the river, despite his earlier misgivings. On the way, he passed a shop with a large window display. His reflection caught his eye, and he stopped short. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. His reflection appeared blurred, indistinct around the edges, like a photograph slightly out of focus or a bad photocopy of a man. He stepped closer, studying the window, raised his hand. The reflection raised its hand too, but the edges were soft, unfocused, bleeding into the glass. No, not the glass. The brightly dressed mannequins behind him appeared perfectly clear and solid, sharp, real. He was the only thing in the reflection that looked less than real. He stepped back, then forward again, trying different angles. The blur remained, clinging to him like fog. "Trick of the light," he muttered, turning away quickly. His hands were shaking as he shoved them into his pockets and continued on.
At the underpass, a small community of homeless people had set up camp. Martin recognized a few faces: Jorge with his military surplus gear, Tammy and her three-legged dog Tripod, Old Pete with his shopping cart fortress of cardboard. Martin approached with a casual gait, positioning himself in the center of their small, makeshift circle. But no one looked up, no one offered a nod of acknowledgement. Jorge continued his meticulous organization. Tammy gently offered scraps to Tripod. Old Pete sorted through his collection of dented aluminum cans. They didn't hear him. They didn't register the sound waves. Hello? He moved closer to Jorge, standing directly beside him now, close enough to see the fine lines around the man's eyes. Jorge! Martin exclaimed, the silence amplifying his rising panic. It's Martin! Jorge's head snapped up, his eyes going wide as they darted around the underpass. Martin? Where? His hand instinctively went to the worn handle of the knife tucked into his boot. Right here, right in front of you, Martin insisted, waving his hands frantically. Jorge's gaze suddenly locked onto him, his eyes widening in shock. Jesus, Martin, where'd you come from? Scared the hell out of me. I've been standing here for 5 minutes, Martin said, his voice strained. No way, Jorge replied, shaking his head, still trying to reconcile Martin's sudden appearance. Just appeared out of nowhere. Tammy looked over, her attention finally drawn by Jorge's reaction. Her eyes widened as she registered Martin's presence.
Martin? Haven't seen you in ages. Where you been hiding?
I saw you Tuesday at the clinic. The words hung in the air. Tuesday, 3 days ago. If she couldn't see him then, his stomach dropped. How long had this been happening?
Tuesday?
Tammy frowned, scratching behind Tripod's ears.
Yeah, I was there, but I don't remember seeing you.
Old Pete's head popped up from behind his cardboard fortress. Hey, Martin, still got that green jacket? I'm wearing it right now, Martin said quietly, looking down at the familiar faded green of his army jacket. The moment his voice softened, something profoundly unsettling occurred. Jorge's eyes began to drift away, focusing on a point just to the left of Martin's head. Tammy's attention returned to Tripod. Old Pete resumed his meticulous sorting of cans. Hello, Martin said, louder now. I'm still here. Silence. It was like an image on a faulty screen, and the humans were losing the signal. He had vanished from their perception once more. Hey, Martin shouted again, the sound echoing under the concrete. Their heads snapped back, startled. Martin, said Jorge, jumping slightly, his hand still hovering near his boot. Stop doing that. Where do you keep disappearing to? I didn't go anywhere, Martin insisted, his voice tight with rising fear.
Well, 1 second you're here, next second you're not,
Tammy said, shrugging, her gaze already beginning to drift.
Weird trick.
Martin was about to plead with them, to demand they see him, when Tripod suddenly emitted a low growl, her eyes fixed intently on Martin. Unlike the human's vacant stares, Tripod's gaze was sharp, focused, and utterly real. The dog could still see him, even when the others couldn't.
What is it, girl?
Tammy asked, following Tripod's unwavering gaze, but her own eyes passed right through Martin, settling instead on the empty air just behind his shoulder. A cold dread settled in Martin's gut. He remained silent, watching the terrifying phenomenon unfold. Within seconds, the others' attention wavered, their eyes unfocused, and they returned to their solitary tasks as if he had never been there. A profound weariness settled over him.
To be seen again, he would have to yell, to fight, but he was too tired. "I'm going to step away now," he announced loudly, his voice trembling slightly.
Huh? Oh, leaving already? Jorge looked back up, his eyes finding Martin again.
"Well, take care, man. Don't be a stranger,"
Yeah, see you around.
Tammy added, offering a small, absent-minded wave. Martin nodded. He backed away slowly, deliberately ceasing to speak. He watched, horror gripping him as their awareness of him flickered and died. By the time he had retreated 10 steps, he could have stepped between Jorge and Tammy, and they wouldn't have flinched. They had completely forgotten his presence once more, their gazes passing through the space he occupied as if it were empty air. Tripod growled, her eyes still fixed on Martin, a low, mournful sound of warning.
Hush, Tripod.
Tammy soothed, looking around nervously.
There's nothing there.
Martin retreated from the underpass, his mind racing. First the cashier, then the teenagers, the librarian, and now people who knew him, all acting as if he were somehow less visible, less present than before. He existed only when he forced his presence upon them with the blunt instrument of sound. He found a secluded spot under a bridge a quarter-mile downstream. It wasn't ideal, too exposed to the wind, but he needed to be alone to think. As he spread his blanket on the cold ground, a terrible thought struck him. What if Cassie? What if she couldn't see him either? He fumbled in his backpack for the plastic sleeve containing Cassie's photo. The photograph was intact, Cassie's smile unchanged, but when Martin touched it, his fingertips left no marks on the plastic. He pressed harder. Nothing. No smudges, no fingerprints. Panic rising, Martin reached for his water bottle. He unscrewed the cap and tried to take a drink. Martin unscrewed the cap of his water bottle and tilted it to his lips. The water poured out and kept going, through his mouth, through his chin, splashing onto his blanket, as if the space where his face should have been was merely air. He stared at the wet blanket. His hands still held the bottle, but he was certain now. He had no internal volume. He stared at the wet blanket, at his hands still holding the bottle. "No," he whispered. "This isn't happening. My hands are just shaking, that's all. Just shaking too much." He stumbled to his feet, his injured knee protesting with a sharp stab of pain, and began a desperate trek back toward the city's harsh lights. He needed a mirror, a true reflection, not the distorted surfaces of shop windows. He went to the public restroom in the small park, the one he always used. The heavy metal door was locked as the parks department closed them at dusk. He pushed on it, trying his luck, but it was no use. He then walked around to the back, where a window was always open. He hated using it. It was hard on his leg, but he had no other choice. He stood inside before the sink's metal mirror. His reflection revealed the familiar terrain of his face, weathered skin, tired eyes, and graying stubble that spoke of countless sleepless nights. Yet an unsettling distance permeated the image, as if he were looking through a pane of frosted glass. He could make out the downturn of his mouth and the haunted look in his eyes, but they seemed soft and blurred. For a moment he blamed the mirror, but then he noticed the "Don't Shake" sign on the opposite wall, reflected back with perfect, crystalline clarity. With a trembling hand, Martin reached up and touched his own face, his fingertips registering the rough stubble, the deep-etched lines, and the bump on his nose. Everything was physically present,
solid beneath his touch, but in the cold, unyielding surface of the mirror, his features seemed to be losing definition, bleeding out into the silver backing. He splashed water on his face, and it streamed down, ordinary and reassuring. He drank from his cupped hands, and the water cooled his throat as it always had. For a moment, he relaxed. Leaving the bathroom's confines sent another ache through his leg. His limping gait fell into a desperate rhythm against the silent night. With no destination or plan, he knew he should be thinking about the blur, his invisibility to normal people, the struggle to be seen even by his own kind. But no thoughts came. He just walked, his mind utterly blank. The city pulsed with the vibrant energy of nightlife. Laughter and fragmented conversations spilled onto the sidewalks as people streamed out of restaurants and bars, their faces flushed with drink and good company. No one noticed Martin as he pushed through crowds. Eventually, exhaustion forced him to stop. He found himself in a small urban park, the same one where he'd first seen the faceless figure under the oak tree.
Martin collapsed onto a bench, exhausted. A subtle movement at the edge of his vision drew his attention. Across the park, a figure stood beneath the skeletal branches of the oak tree, tall and thin in a gray coat.
No face.
This time, Martin didn't run. He was too tired, too confused in the bewildering currents of his fading reality. He simply watched, a strange sense of resignation settling upon him. The figure approached slowly, stopping a few feet from the bench. It stood motionless, its blank, non-face turned toward Martin. Unlike the noise he'd had to make to force the attention of the living, he called them that now, the living, this silence felt honest, absolute. "What's happening to me?" Martin whispered. A thin wisp of white escaped his lips, trembling in the morning chill before it dissolved. The figure offered no verbal response. It didn't need to yell to be seen. "Am I becoming like you?" Martin asked, a tremor of fear underlying his words. The figure tilted its head slightly, then reached out one hand. Martin hesitated, his gaze fixed on the offered hand. What choice did he truly have left? With a sigh, he extended his own. The figure's grip was gentle but firm, urging Martin to his feet. When he stood, his joints protesting with a familiar ache, the figure released his hand and turned, walking slowly away, its silent expectation clear. Martin was to follow. They walked through the dark park together, the figure leading. As they ventured deeper into the shadows, more shapes emerged, other faceless ones, their forms varying in height and build. They fell into step around Martin, a silent procession moving through the hushed landscape of the night. They led him to a small clearing, hidden by dense trees and overgrown bushes. A meager fire burned within a dented metal trash can, casting flickering, dancing light over the gathered faceless figures. Dozens of them stood in a loose, welcoming circle around the fragile flames. Martin recognized some of the clothing, the unmistakable purple and orange of Susan's mismatched sweaters, the faded canvas and scuffed leather of Luke's hunting gear, the stained, bright red coat old Joe always wore. "Is this what happens?" Martin whispered. No one answered. No one could. And Martin didn't expect any answer. But the circle shifted, making room for Martin to join them beside the warmth of the flickering fire, a new member of their invisible community. He took the offered place, grateful for the warmth. The faceless ones stood around him, a silent, eternal company of the erased. Martin didn't know how long he stayed there. Time seemed meaningless in the circle of the forgotten, where the only thing you had to fear was silence, and the absolute absence of a face looking back at you.
Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, marked only by the subtle shifts in the city's distant hum and the changing quality of the light filtering through the hidden clearing. A strange, unexpected peace began to bloom within Martin, a quiet acceptance of what he had become. This half-existence wasn't a sudden curse, he realized, but the culmination of years of fading, not just since homelessness, but long before. The slow erosion of his place in the world began with the lost job, the numbing comfort of the bottle, the silence on the other end of the phone line when Cassie stopped calling. The world had been learning to look through him long before he physically began to disappear. The faceless ones understood this silent truth. They were all travelers on the same desolate path. Martin fell into the rhythm of his new reality. By day he drifted through the city, a ghost in its vibrant arteries. Most of the living remained oblivious. Their gazes slid past him as if he were a trick of the light, a momentary shimmer in their periphery. Only those with a certain sensitivity, the frayed edges of society themselves, might feel a sudden chill as he passed, might catch a fleeting, unsettling glimpse from the corner of their eye. He discovered the effort required to briefly reassert his presence, a deliberately knocked-over trash can, a desperate shout ripped from his non-existent lungs, the fleeting pressure of a touch. But these acts were temporary disruptions, quickly smoothed over by the living, their minds rewriting the anomaly into something palatable, something that fit their understanding of the world.
By night, he sought the solace of the faceless gatherings, sometimes in the hidden park clearing, sometimes beneath the echoing arches of bridges, sometimes within the decaying embrace of abandoned buildings. They shared the meager warmth of scavenged fires, the silent communion of shared experience, their only language. And he learned their ways of communication, not speech. Speech required mouths, features, faces they no longer possessed, but a kind of impression, a projection of feelings and simple concepts that the others could sense. Martin checked on Delia occasionally. Unlike many others who had known him, she seemed able to perceive him still, though she pretended not to. Her eyes would track his movement, then deliberately look elsewhere. She'd mutter warnings to herself when he approached. Don't see it. Don't acknowledge it. Stay real. He wanted to tell her it wasn't so bad, this half-existence. There was a strange freedom in it. No more anxiety about the next meal or the next night's shelter. No more painful longing for his old life. The shame was gone. Shame requires an audience. But he respected her choice to fight against fading. Not everyone embraced the transition.
3 months after his transformation began, Martin found himself drawn to his daughter's neighborhood. He hadn't planned to go there. His feet simply carried him, a remnant of old habits.
Cassie lived in a brownstone on a tree-lined street, the sort of place Martin could never have afforded, even in his working days. He'd walked by occasionally in the past, hoping for a glimpse of her through a window or coming home from work. Today, miraculously, she was just leaving the building as he approached. She wore a smart business suit, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked like the successful professional she'd become, so different from the rebellious teenager he remembered. Martin stopped, drinking in the sight of her. He hadn't seen her in over 5 years. He had always thought he needed to get on his feet before he saw her again. He never imagined it would happen like this. "Cassie," he whispered, not expecting her to hear. But something made her pause. She looked around, frowning slightly, then shook her head and continued down the steps to the sidewalk. Martin couldn't help himself. He moved closer. "Cassie, it's Dad." She stopped again, turning slowly. This time her eyes settled on him, or rather, on the space he occupied.
"Hello?
She called.
Is someone there?"
Martin's non-existent heart seemed to skip. She could sense him at least. He moved closer still, reaching out one hand, not quite touching her. "It's me. I know you can't really see me anymore, but it's Dad." Cassie shivered, wrapping her arms around herself.
"This is weird."
She muttered, then louder.
"If someone's there, this isn't funny."
Martin withdrew his hand. Of course she couldn't see him properly, couldn't hear him clearly. He was too far gone for that. But she sensed something. That was more than most people managed. "I just wanted to see you, to know you're doing well. I'm sorry for everything, Cassie, for disappearing, for the drinking, for not being there when you needed me." Cassie stood perfectly still, her head tilted slightly, as if straining to hear a distant sound. "Anyway," Martin continued, "I wanted you to know I'm okay, different but okay. And I'm proud of you. Always was." Cassie's eyes filled with sudden tears. She brushed them away, looking confused at her own emotional response.
"Dad?"
she whispered. Martin reached out again, letting his fingers hover near her cheek. He concentrated hard, summoning whatever substance he still possessed. For just a fraction of a second, his fingertips were solid. Cassie gasped, her eyes widening as she felt the ghost of a cold, familiar pressure against her skin. Then it was gone. Martin couldn't maintain the connection. Cassie stood frozen for a long moment, then shook herself and hurried away down the street, glancing back once with a bewildered expression. Martin watched her go. It was enough, more than he'd expected, a final goodbye of sorts. He turned away, heading back toward the gathering places of the Faceless Ones.
Years passed. Martin lost track of how many. The city changed around him. Buildings rose and fell. People came and went. But the Faceless Ones remained constant, drifting through the margins of society, watching over those on the edge of fading away. Martin learned to help the newly transitioning ones, those who, like him, had been forgotten so thoroughly that they began to physically fade from the world. He would guide them to the gatherings, teach them the ways of their new existence, help them find peace in their transformed state. Sometimes he would visit Cassie,
watching from a distance as she lived her life, her marriage, her children, her career successes. She never called him again after that one day, but occasionally she would pause, looking around as if sensing a familiar presence. That was enough for Martin. One crisp autumn day, much like the day when he'd first seen the faceless ones, Martin found himself back in the park. He stood beneath the oak tree, watching people pass by. A homeless man limped along the path, favoring his right leg. He looked to be in his 50s, with a weathered face and wary eyes. A backpack hung from his shoulders, everything he owned in one canvas bag. Martin recognized the signs. This man was beginning to fade, beginning to slip through the cracks of society's attention. Soon he would start seeing the faceless ones, just as Martin had. As if confirming his thoughts, the man suddenly froze, staring directly at Martin. His coffee cup slipped from his fingers, the splash a sudden punctuation mark on the silent path. His expression transformed into one of pure terror. Martin looked down at himself. He wondered what the man saw, the same terrible blankness that had frightened Martin all those years ago. The man backed away slowly, then turned and hurried off, his bad leg dragging slightly. Martin watched him go, feeling a strange sympathy. The old fear was distant now, replaced by a quiet understanding. Soon enough, the man would join them in the spaces between. Martin raised one hand, a slow, almost imperceptible gesture, like a wave across the thinning veil between worlds, toward the space where the man had been. Welcome, the silent gesture conveyed, a wordless greeting to the man he once was, and to the countless others who would inevitably follow. You're not alone.